The first time the rancher saw them, the wind had blown the dust so thick across the plains that even the mountains looked faded, like ghosts rising behind the sun. He had been riding back from the canyon, reins loose, hat pulled low, when he found the three women near the dried creek bed, barefoot, trembling, and draped in worn blankets that had once carried Apache symbols now faded by rain and tears. They didn't look up when he stopped his horse. They just stood there, as if unsure whether to run or beg. He could tell they had been through something cruel. Not the kind of pain that left bruises alone, but the kind that carved itself into the soul. Their eyes were empty in a way that made the old rancher's chest tighten. The youngest clutched the hand of another older woman, who seemed to be keeping them from falling apart. The third, with long dark hair tangled like the branches of mesquite, stared straight ahead, her lips trembling. He dismounted slowly, his boots sinking in the cracked earth. "You lost?" he asked quietly. They didn't answer. One flinched when the saddle leather creaked. He noticed then. Their feet were cut and raw, their faces sunburned, their dresses torn at the seams. Behind them the trail was empty, no horses, no men, no wagons. Only silence. The rancher wasn't a man who asked questions. Life on the frontier had taught him that sometimes answers only brought more sorrow. But something in their stillness made him uneasy. "Come on," he said after a long pause. "There's shelter a mile north. You can rest there." They hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. Then the oldest woman nodded once, almost a bow, and the three followed behind as he led his horse through the barren field. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from the far hills, Apache country. When they reached the ranch, he brought them water first. They drank like people who hadn't tasted kindness in months. He gave them bread from the kitchen and let them sit by the fire, but they kept glancing at the door, as though expecting someone to burst in. He noticed the scars on their wrists, the bruises near their shoulders. Later that night, when he lit the lantern in the bunkhouse and spread blankets on the beds, they seemed confused. One of them reached for his arm, her eyes glassy, as if she thought she owed him something. He stepped back, shaking his head. "You don't need to do that," he said firmly. "You're safe here." The words didn't seem to make sense to them. They exchanged looks, whispering in a language he didn't understand. The youngest began to cry silently, covering her face. The rancher set down the lantern and left the room, closing the door behind him. Outside, under the wide desert sky, he leaned on the corral fence, staring at the stars. He'd fought against Apaches once, years ago, when the army called for volunteers. He'd seen death up close, seen villages burned and lives ruined. He thought he'd left that world behind when he bought the ranch. But tonight, those old memories came rushing back. Inside the bunkhouse, the women huddled together. They didn't understand why he hadn't touched them. For months, maybe years, they had been treated as property, passed around by men who called them comfort, though their lives were anything but. They had expected the same here on this lonely ranch. But the rancher's silence, his refusal, his gentleness, it broke something inside them. The next morning, the sun rose pale over the hills. The rancher brought coffee and food. The women wouldn't meet his eyes. He set the tray down and spoke softly. "You can stay here till you're ready to move on. I don't want nothing from you." They didn't answer. The eldest woman stared at him with a mix of suspicion and disbelief. She'd seen men act kind before, but kindness always had a price. The rancher tipped his hat and walked out to the barn, leaving them alone again. For the next few days, they stayed mostly quiet. He saw them gather water, wash their clothes in the stream, and mend torn fabric with thread from his old supplies. The youngest began feeding the chickens. The middle one helped in the kitchen, though she barely spoke. The eldest stood on the porch most evenings, watching the horizon as if waiting for someone. Neighbors had noticed. Out here, everyone noticed everything. A ranch hand from the next valley stopped by, asking if he'd taken in some Apache women. The rancher didn't answer, just said they were under his care, and that was the end of it. But rumors traveled faster than the wind. One night, a rider came through, one of the Army's scouts. He was young, proud, and full of that cruel energy common in men who'd never lost anything. "You know who they are, right?" he said, glancing toward the bunkhouse. "Those are the ones who used to be kept at the outpost down south. The soldiers called them comfort girls, said the Apaches gave them up for trade." The rancher's jaw tightened. "That what they said?" The scout grinned. "They're trouble, old man. You best hand them over before the officers come looking." The rancher's hand hovered near the rifle, leaning against the wall. "Ain't handing anyone to nobody," he said calmly. "Now finish your coffee and ride on." The scout laughed, not taking him seriously. but the look in the rancher's eyes made him leave before the moon rose. That night, the women heard the rancher pacing outside their door. They didn't know why he was protecting them. They only knew that his silence held no threat, his gaze no hunger, and that frightened them more than cruelty ever had. Because kindness was foreign now, almost unbearable. The next morning, the eldest woman approached him while he was mending the fence. She tried to speak, but her English was broken. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "Why no touch?" He set down the hammer and looked at her. "Because you're people," he said simply. "Not something to be used." She didn't understand all the words, but she felt the weight of them. Tears welled up in her eyes and she turned away, her shoulders shaking. The rancher didn't follow. He just went back to work, each strike of the hammer echoing across the open field. That evening, dark clouds gathered over the hills. The women sat by the fire again, whispering among themselves. They didn't know what to do with this strange peace. Freedom, it turned out, was a heavy thing when you'd forgotten how to hold it. Thunder rolled across the sky and the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The rancher came in from the storm, soaked to the bone. He took off his hat and hung his coat by the door. For a moment their eyes met, theirs filled with fear and confusion, his with something deeper, almost sorrow. Then the sound of horses echoed outside, more than one. He stepped toward the window and saw torchlight moving through the rain. The Army scout had returned and he wasn't alone. The women froze. The rancher reached for his rifle, the metal glinting in the firelight. The eldest woman whispered something in Apache, her face pale. He looked back at them and said, "Don't be afraid." But his voice carried a weight that told them they should be. Outside, the torches drew closer. Men shouted through the storm. The rancher took a deep breath, eyes narrowing. He'd made a choice the moment he brought them in from the dust, and now it was coming due. The wind howled through the broken fence as thunder cracked overhead. Inside the bunkhouse, the fire flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. The women clung to each other as the door latch trembled, and when the first torchlight hit the window, the rancher stepped forward, jaw set, ready to face whatever came next. Rain hammered the roof like drumbeats from a distant war. The rancher stood by the window, the light from the fire throwing a hard glow across his face. The torchlights outside wavered in the storm, their flames struggling against the wind. The horses were restless, their silhouettes shifting like ghosts in the rain. Inside the small bunkhouse, the three Apache women sat frozen near the hearth, their faces pale and eyes wide with dread. The eldest whispered something to the others, a trembling prayer in their tongue, words the rancher didn't understand but felt deep in his chest. He knew this was coming. Men like the scout didn't take kindly to defiance, especially from someone who had once worn the same uniform. The rancher had served long ago, before the war took his brother, and before his heart hardened against orders that made no sense. He had seen the army claim to bring peace and instead bring ashes. That was why he left it all behind, why he came to this patch of land between the canyon and the open plains. But trouble always found its way back. When the knock came, it was not polite. It was the kind that rattled the door and made the youngest woman jump. The rancher stepped forward and opened it slowly. Rain blew in sideways, soaking the floor. The scout stood there with 4 soldiers, their faces hidden under dripping hats. "Evening," the scout said with a smirk. "We're here for what belongs to the army." "They don't belong to nobody," the rancher replied quietly. His hand rested near the doorframe, where his rifle leaned within reach. The scout laughed. "You going soft, old man? These are government property. Comfort women for the outpost. They ran off and the captain ain't happy." The rancher's jaw clenched. "Tell your captain they ain't his to own." The scout's smile faded. He stepped closer, water dripping off his coat.
"You sure you want to do this?"
"You're outnumbered, and we both know the army don't forgive theft." "Then I guess I'll be remembered as a thief," the rancher said. The wind howled through the doorway. For a long moment neither man moved. Then the scout turned to his men. "Get the women," he ordered. The rancher lifted the rifle. "Nobody's taking them." The soldiers froze. The firelight flickered across his face, steady and cold. The scout raised his hand, signaling the men to stand down. "Fine," he said. "We'll leave tonight, but don't think this ends here." He leaned close, his voice low and full of venom. "You're harboring enemy women. The law will come for you." When they finally rode off, the rancher shut the door and barred it. The sound of horses faded into the storm, but the silence that followed was worse. The women stared at him, shivering. The eldest stood slowly and stepped closer, her eyes full of confusion and fear. "Why?" she asked again. He didn't answer right away. He poured himself a drink from the old jug by the window, took a slow sip and stared at the flames. "Because once someone should have done the same for my people," he said softly. That night he couldn't sleep. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. The army wouldn't forget, and they wouldn't forgive. He knew what was coming, and he didn't know if he could stop it. But when he looked through the small window at the women sleeping near the fire, he made himself a promise. He'd protect them whatever it cost. The next morning brought calm skies, but the air felt heavy. The storm had washed the land clean, leaving the soil dark and slick. The rancher went about his chores like nothing had happened, but the women could feel the unease in his movements. He spoke little, his eyes scanning the horizon often. By midday, he saddled his horse and told them he needed to ride into town for supplies. The eldest woman caught his sleeve before he left. "They come back?" she asked. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but I'll be ready." He rode hard through the muddy trail toward the small town of Dry Hollow. It was little more than a saloon, a store, and a jail. The sheriff there knew him well enough, an old man with a limp and a sharp sense for trouble. When the rancher stepped through the door, the sheriff looked up from his desk. "Heard some talk," he said. "Something about you hiding Apache women." "I'm not hiding anyone," the rancher said. "I'm keeping them safe." The sheriff sighed, setting down his cup. "You know how folks around here feel. Army's already stirred up. You're risking everything." "Maybe," the rancher replied, "but I've seen what the army does when nobody stands in the way." The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll say I didn't see you, but you best be careful. The outpost commander sent word. They're looking to make an example of someone." When the rancher left town, he bought extra feed, salt, and a box of ammunition. He rode home through the setting sun, the sky burning red behind the mountains. As he approached the ranch, he saw smoke rising from the chimney and felt a small wave of relief. But as he got closer, something felt wrong. The corral gate was open, one of the horses missing. He dismounted quietly and walked toward the bunkhouse. Inside, the women were gathered near the fire, their faces pale. The youngest one held a torn piece of cloth, part of a soldier's jacket. "They came back," the eldest whispered. They watched. The rancher's stomach tightened. He stepped outside, scanning the hills. No riders in sight, but he could feel eyes watching from somewhere beyond the ridge. That night, he moved the women into the main cabin. He didn't tell them, but he slept in the chair near the window, rifle across his knees. Every sound, the wind against the shutters, the creak of the floorboards, kept him awake. Days passed, slow and tense. The women began to regain small pieces of their old selves. The youngest laughed once while feeding the hens, a soft sound that startled even her. The middle one began singing low tunes when she washed clothes by the stream. The eldest spent her evenings sewing near the fire, mending their worn dresses with careful hands. Yet despite these small signs of peace, the shadow of fear never left them. The rancher saw it in their eyes every time a rider passed on the trail. He tried to keep them calm, teaching them small tasks around the ranch, showing them how to tend to the horses or gather firewood safely. Bit by bit, trust began to grow, but so did the danger. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and the fields shimmered with heat, a wagon came rolling down the trail. The rancher tensed, hand on his revolver, but it wasn't soldiers. It was a woman from town, the storekeeper's wife, bringing flour and sugar he'd ordered. She noticed the figures behind the window and frowned. "You got company?" "Helpers," he said quickly. Passing through. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. When she left, the rancher saw the worry in her eyes. He knew word would spread again. Out here, secrets never stayed buried. That evening, the eldest woman approached him by the corral. "We go soon," she said softly. "You in danger," he shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." She looked at him with deep sadness. "They come for you. Because of us." He leaned against the fence, watching the last light fade over the mountains. "They'll come whether you're here or not. Might as well give them a reason." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, there was something like gratitude, or maybe sorrow between them. As night settled, the sound of coyotes echoed across the plains. The ranch felt quiet, almost peaceful again, but deep down, the rancher knew peace was never meant to last long in this country. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the soldiers were gathering, and with them came a past he had tried so hard to escape. When the fire burned low, the eldest woman whispered to the others. They had to decide what to do, stay and risk his life or leave and face the world alone again. None of them could bear the thought of either. The rancher sat outside beneath the stars, the rifle beside him, watching the horizon for movement. Every shadow felt alive. Every gust of wind carried danger. Somewhere in the distance, a single light flickered on the hill. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't a campfire. It was a signal. He rose slowly, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the glow. The storm had passed, but a new one was coming. One that no amount of rain could wash away. The light on the hill burned faint, but steady. The rancher stood in the darkness, jaw tight, his breath clouding in the cool night air. He knew what that meant. A signal. Someone marking the ranch for soldiers to return by dawn. He turned toward the cabin where the three women slept, the glow from the fire flickering through the window. He couldn't bring himself to wake them. Not yet. For now, he needed to think. He walked out to the barn, the ground soft under his boots. Inside, his old chest sat beneath a layer of dust. He opened it slowly. Inside were pieces of a past he tried to bury, his army coat, a faded photo of his brother, and the old Springfield rifle they'd carried through the frontier wars. He ran a hand over the weapon's barrel, remembering the smell of gunpowder, the cries of the wounded, the orders that had turned good men into ghosts. He had walked away from all that once, but tonight it was walking back to him. At dawn, the women woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the rancher loading supplies onto a wagon. The eldest came outside, her hair braided tight, face pale from sleeplessness. "You go?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "You are," he said. "They'll come here today. You ride north toward the canyon. There's a trading post 2 days out. Folks there might help." She looked at the wagon, then back at him. "And you?" "I'll slow them down," he said. The youngest appeared in the doorway, tears filling her eyes. "You die," she whispered. "Not if I can help it," he replied, forcing a faint smile. But they didn't want to go. The eldest woman folded her arms and shook her head. "We stay, you help us." "We help you," he sighed, looking at the sky. The storm had cleared, but the air still carried the heavy stillness that comes before violence. "If you stay," he said finally, "then you listen to everything I say. No questions, no running out there." "Understood," they nodded. By midday, the sun burned high. The rancher dug trenches near the fence line and hid the women in the root cellar with food and blankets. He kept his horse saddled, rifle ready. Every sound, the buzz of insects, the groan of wind through dry grass made him tense. Late afternoon brought movement on the horizon. Riders. 5 of them this time, moving in a straight line toward the ranch. He recognized the scout in front, riding proud like a man certain of victory. The rancher stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Morning, boys," he called. The scout grinned. "You had your chance, old man. Captain wants those women back. He says they belong to the government." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "You tell your captain that the war's over." "This land's mine, and so's what happens on it." The scout's grin faded. He nodded to his men. "Take him." They advanced, but the rancher fired first. The shot cracked across the open field, hitting the dirt near the lead rider's horse, spooking the animal. The others scattered, cursing. The rancher ducked behind the porch railing, firing again. Bullets kicked up dust near the corral. Horses screamed and bolted. The fight didn't last long. The soldiers weren't expecting resistance. They pulled back toward the ridge, shouting threats as they retreated. When silence fell again, the rancher's hands trembled. He wasn't young anymore. His breath came hard. He leaned against the porch post, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd bought them time, but not much. Inside the cellar, the women had heard everything. When he opened the trapdoor, they were huddled together, eyes wide. The youngest reached out to touch his arm, trembling. "They come again," she said. He nodded. "I know." That night he sat by the fire sharpening his knife, the women quiet nearby. The eldest spoke softly. "You fight like them," she said. "Like soldiers." "I was one," he admitted. She looked into the flames. "You kill Apache?" He hesitated, the question cutting deep. "Yes," he said finally. "Back then I thought it was right." The words hung heavy in the air. The middle woman, who rarely spoke, said in a low voice, "And now?" He stared into the fire. "Now I see what it cost." The eldest nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You have old pain." "Same as us," he didn't answer. Outside, the coyotes cried, and the wind shifted cold. The next morning brought quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. The women helped repair the fence and tend the animals, trying to bring normal rhythm back, but fear lingered in their movements. The rancher watched them from the porch, realizing how different the ranch felt now. no longer just his place of solitude, but something fragile and alive. By afternoon, a shadow appeared on the trail, a man on horseback wearing a long coat and a badge pinned to his chest. The sheriff. He dismounted and tied his horse by the post. Heard there was a skirmish, he said. Armies riled up. They say you shot first. The rancher crossed his arms. They came to take what wasn't theirs, the sheriff sighed. You're a good man, but this ain't a fight you can win. The army's not going to forget this. They'll bring a warrant, maybe even burn this place down. The rancher said nothing. The sheriff looked past him toward the cabin window, where a curtain moved slightly. You're protecting them? Yes, the rancher said. The sheriff nodded slowly. I figured. Just be ready. You're standing on a line, and it's about to break. After he left, the rancher sat on the porch steps, hat in hand, staring at the dirt road that led toward town. He knew the sheriff was right. The law wouldn't side with him. They never did for people who went against the army. That evening, as the sky turned red and gold, the eldest woman brought him food and sat nearby. You can go, she said quietly. Leave us, live. He shook his head. I've run from too much already, the middle woman asked softly. Why you help us? You owe nothing, he looked at her, voice low. Because once when I was in uniform we found a camp like yours. We called it a relocation center, but it was a prison. There were women and children. They were starving. I didn't stop it then. I can't undo it, but I can do this. The women didn't speak again. The fire cracked, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled like a warning. As night fell, the rancher checked his rifle again, knowing they'd return soon. And next time, they wouldn't just threaten. They'd come to destroy. Far off in the hills, a flicker of firelight appeared again. Not one this time, but many. He counted 6, maybe 7 torches moving slowly down the ridge. The army had come back, and they weren't alone. The rancher went to the cellar and told the women to stay quiet, to stay hidden no matter what they heard. The eldest reached for his hand, pressing something into his palm. An old Apache pendant carved from bone. For protection, she said. He nodded, closing his fingers around it, and stepped outside into the cool night. The sound of hooves drew closer. He could see their outlines now, men with rifles, a wagon, and the scout riding ahead again, smirking like a man certain the night would end in victory. The rancher took position behind the corral fence, his heart steady. He wasn't fighting for the war this time. He was fighting for something simpler, dignity, mercy, and the last bit of peace he still believed in. The soldiers dismounted surrounding the house. The scout called out, "Come on, old man, you can't win this. Hand them over, and maybe we'll let you keep the place." The rancher's voice came back strong through the dark. "You already took everything worth keeping." The scout's smile faded. He motioned to his men, "Burn it." The torches lifted, their flames bright against the night sky. The rancher aimed his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. The crack of the shot echoed across the plains, sending sparks flying and horses rearing. Men shouted. Fire spilled across dry brush, and the wind carried the chaos toward the barn. The women below could hear it all, the gunfire, the shouting, the smell of smoke filling the air. The youngest clutched the eldest's arm, trembling. The eldest whispered, "He fight for us now. We pray for him." Outside, the rancher fired again, ducking behind cover. He was outnumbered, but every shot bought another breath, another heartbeat of time. The flames grew higher, the sky glowing orange. The scout advanced through the smoke, shouting orders. The rancher reloaded, eyes stinging, and took aim again. Somewhere behind him, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of the women's voices rising from the cellar, singing softly, praying in the old tongue of their people. It was a sound both haunting and powerful, one that seemed to cut through the fire and dust like a heartbeat refusing to die. And as the flames closed around the ranch, the night stood still for one impossible moment, with no clear end in sight, only the echo of resistance and the weight of what was yet to come. The night burned red with the light of the flames. The rancher crouched low behind the fence, his body aching from the recoil of every shot he fired. Smoke swirled through the air, thick and stinging, and the crackle of burning wood mixed with the distant roar of thunder. He could barely see the men through the haze, but their voices carried, angry, determined, echoing through the open land. The fire had begun to spread to the barn, climbing the wooden beams like a hungry animal. The scout shouted something the wind swallowed. The rancher caught only fragments, orders to circle, to flank, to corner him. He shifted his rifle, counting what few rounds he had left. The women were still in the cellar beneath the cabin, and he could almost feel their fear rising through the ground like heat from the fire. He moved carefully, sliding along the wall toward the side of the cabin, where the shadows were thicker. Sparks rained down and the smell of burning hay filled his lungs. His horse whinnied wildly in the corral, kicking against the gate. He wanted to calm it, but there was no time. The soldiers were spreading out, their torches bobbing through the smoke like fireflies of war. He took a deep breath and waited until one of them came close. When the man's boots crunched over the dirt near the porch, the rancher swung the rifle butt hard against his shoulder, sending the soldier sprawling. The weapon clattered away, and before the man could shout, the rancher had pulled him into the shadows. He wrestled the man's pistol from his belt, breathing hard. The scout's voice came again, sharp and mocking. "You can't win this, old man. You're protecting what ain't yours." The rancher pressed his back against the wall, eyes narrowing. "You don't understand," he muttered under his breath. "That's exactly why I'm doing it." Lightning flashed, and for a moment the whole valley lit up. The soldiers' shapes flickered like phantoms, moving fast, closing in. He fired once, the sound cracking like thunder. One man dropped. The others dove for cover. Inside the cabin, the eldest woman whispered to the others, "He fight still." Her hands trembled as she held the youngest close. The middle woman reached for the pendant that had been left behind, holding it tight between her palms. The earth above them shook with each distant gunshot, each shout. Then came a sound that froze them all, the door of the cabin splintering open. The rancher heard it too. His heart jolted as he realized one or two had broken away and found their way to the back. He sprinted toward the house, bullets whizzing past him, tearing through the dry air. He kicked the door open just as one of the soldiers had pried up the cellar hatch. The man turned, startled. The rancher didn't hesitate. He tackled him to the floor, the two of them crashing through a table. The rifle went off, splintering the ceiling. They struggled in the firelight, boots sliding on spilled oil and dust. The soldier grabbed the rancher's collar, but the old man slammed his elbow into the younger man's jaw, sending him sprawling. The soldier's head hit the wood floor with a crack and he went still. Smoke filled the cabin now. Flames had begun to lick the outside walls. The women pushed open the hatch, eyes wide with terror. "Fire!" the eldest cried. The rancher grabbed the lantern from the wall and smashed it through the back window, clearing a way out. "Go!" he ordered. "Head for the riverbed. Don't stop!" They hesitated, but his tone left no room for question. They climbed out one by one, the wind whipping their hair, sparks flying past their faces. The rancher followed, rifle slung over his shoulder. They ran through the pasture, the dry grass crunching underfoot. Behind them, the ranch burned, a storm of fire and fury lighting up the night sky. The horses had broken free, galloping wild into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats mixed with the shouts of soldiers chasing after them. The rancher led the women down toward the creek, where the earth dipped and the trees offered some cover. They stumbled through the rocks, the youngest crying softly. The eldest woman tried to keep her steady, whispering in Apache to calm her. They reached the riverbed, dry and cracked from the long summer, but still deep enough to hide in. The rancher motioned for them to crouch low beneath the ridge. Above them, the scout and his men searched through the smoke. The scout's voice cut through the night. "He won't get far. The women are ours." The rancher's hand tightened on the rifle. The women huddled close, their breathing shallow. Every second stretched long, every movement above like thunder in their ears. Minutes passed. The fire began to fade behind them, but the glow still painted the sky. Then came another sound, the distant call of a bugle. More soldiers, reinforcements. The rancher's gut twisted. The army wasn't just chasing them now, they were closing the trap. He turned to the eldest woman.
They'll search the creek soon.
"We have to move," she nodded, though fear shone in her eyes. "Where?" "North Ridge," he said. "Caves up there. You can hide till sunrise." He led them along the shadow of the ridge, staying low. The smoke followed like a ghost, curling over the plains. Behind them, the shouts grew louder, torches spreading across the fields. Halfway to the ridge, the youngest woman stumbled. The rancher stopped and lifted her up without a word. His arms ached, but he kept moving. The middle woman glanced back once, seeing torches closing in. She whispered, "They come." The rancher picked up the pace, his boots sinking into soft dirt. The sound of hooves was closer now, echoing off the canyon walls. The women's breathing turned ragged. The ridge loomed ahead, black and jagged against the burning sky. When they reached the base, he pointed to a narrow path winding upward. "Go," he said. "Stay together." The eldest touched his arm. "You come too." He shook his head. "I'll follow." But he didn't. He stayed behind, crouched low near the rocks. The soldiers' voices were close enough now that he could hear them arguing. The scout barked orders, furious. "Fan out! He's here somewhere." The rancher took aim, waiting until one rider broke away from the group. The shot rang out, and the man fell from his horse. The others shouted, firing blindly into the dark. The rancher ducked behind a boulder, heart hammering. He could feel the vibration of their bullets hitting stone. Up on the ridge, the women climbed on trembling legs. The path was steep, narrow, and slick with dust. The eldest led, whispering encouragement. The youngest sobbed quietly, her hands shaking as she crawled upward. The middle woman looked back once and saw the flashes of gunfire below, brief sparks in the dark, like lightning strikes. The rancher fired again, then rolled behind another rock. His breath came ragged, the rifle barrel hot in his hands. The scout spotted the flash and shouted, "He's down by the ridge. Circle him." The rancher glanced upward, seeing the faint movement of the women reaching the top. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. The soldiers were closing in fast, cutting off his retreat. He fired his last round, hitting one of the torches, plunging part of the field into darkness. Then he grabbed the fallen soldier's pistol and moved toward the trees. The smoke had thickened again, choking the air, masking his movements. At the top of the ridge, the women huddled inside the cave, listening to the chaos below. The eldest held the youngest close, whispering prayers. The middle woman stared into the night, her heart torn between fear and the need to go back. Below, the scout advanced through the smoke, his revolver drawn. He called out into the wind, his voice sharp. "You can't hide forever!" "You think they'll thank you when you're dead?" The rancher's voice came back from the dark, calm but heavy. "You wouldn't understand." He could see them now, shadows moving through the haze, rifles gleaming. He ducked low, preparing for whatever came next. His mind wasn't on himself anymore. It was on the women, on their faces, their trembling hands, and the life they might still have if he could hold off the storm just a little longer. The firelight flickered across the land like dying stars. The wind howled through the canyons, carrying the cries of men and the echoes of old wars. And as the soldiers spread through the smoke, and the women held each other in silence above, the night seemed to pause, caught between survival and tragedy, mercy and vengeance, just before everything would come crashing down. The first rays of dawn crept across the ridge, painting the smoke in shades of gold and gray. The land was quiet now, except for the faint hiss of dying fire and the wind moving through the burned grass. The rancher lay near the rocks at the base of the ridge, his breath shallow, one arm clutching his side where the bullet had grazed him. His rifle was empty. The air smelled of ash and blood, but above all of silence. The kind that follows after chaos has spent itself. The soldiers were gone. What was left of them had ridden off before sunrise, carrying their wounded and leaving the dead behind. The scout had been among them, slumped over his saddle, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The rancher hadn't fired that last shot, but someone had. Maybe it had been one of his own men in the confusion, or maybe fate had a hand in it. Either way, the fight was over. He pushed himself up slowly, groaning as the pain cut through his ribs. Smoke still rose from what had been his barn. The roof of the cabin had caved in during the night, blackened and ruined. The animals were gone, the fences charred, the land scarred. Everything he had built over years of lonely work was gone in one night. He turned his head toward the ridge. Somewhere up there the women were waiting. That thought gave him strength. He gripped the rock beside him and began to climb, one slow step at a time. His boots slipped on the ash and gravel, his breath heavy, but he didn't stop. When he reached the ledge near the top, he saw movement, a shadow against the morning light. The eldest woman stepped out from the cave, her face pale but her eyes alive with recognition. She called out softly, then hurried down to meet him, her bare feet sliding on the rocks. Behind her came the other two, helping each other along the narrow path. The youngest cried when she saw the blood on his shirt. He smiled weakly and said, "It's nothing. I've had worse." They helped him into the cave where it was cool and still. The middle woman tore a strip from her skirt to bandage his wound, her hands gentle. The eldest looked at him and whispered, "They gone?" He nodded slowly. For now. They sat together in the quiet for a long time. The fire below had burned out, leaving only black smoke curling into the brightening sky. The rancher leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. The youngest woman held a small canteen to his lips, and he took a sip of warm, metallic-tasting water. After a while, he spoke. "You should head north soon. The army won't stop looking forever." The eldest woman shook her head. "We go when you go," she said firmly. He looked at her, wanting to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. These women had lost everything once already. He couldn't take away their will now, so he nodded and let it be. They stayed hidden until sunset, resting, gathering strength. The land below lay quiet and broken. Smoke trailed from the ruins like a ghost that refused to leave. When evening came, they began their slow descent. The wind was cooler now, carrying the smell of rain from far-off clouds. When they reached what was left of the ranch, the sight made their hearts heavy. The cabin was gone, the corral nothing but charred posts, and the ground was littered with bullet casings and burned tools. But even in the ruin, there was a strange peace. The war that had come to their doorstep had passed on, leaving only silence behind. The rancher limped to where the barn had stood. He knelt and picked up a piece of scorched wood, the last remnant of his home. "Guess it's time to start over," he said quietly. The eldest woman came to stand beside him. "We help," she said. "We build again." He looked at her and gave a small smile. "You'd stay?" She nodded once. "You protect us. We protect you." That night, they made a small fire among the stones near the creek. The flames danced low, flickering against their tired faces. They shared the little food they had left, dried corn, a bit of bread saved from before the attack. No one spoke much. Words seemed too small for what had happened. When the stars came out, the rancher lay back, staring at the endless sky. He thought of his brother, of the war, of all the things he had done and left undone. For years he'd lived alone to forget the past. But somehow these women, broken and strong in ways he couldn't name, had brought him face to face with it again. He didn't know what forgiveness looked like, but maybe this was the start. In the following days, they worked together to salvage what they could. The eldest woman knew how to build from nothing. She had lived through worse. The middle one was quiet but quick, gathering materials from what remained. The youngest laughed again as she found a few surviving hens hiding in the brush. Slowly, the land began to breathe again. One morning, they buried the bodies near the edge of the property, the soldiers and the ranch hand who had fallen when the fighting began. The rancher said a few words for each, his voice low but steady. The women stood with their heads bowed. When it was done, they marked the graves with simple stones. There was no hatred in their hearts, only exhaustion and a strange kind of peace. Weeks passed. The rains came early that year, washing the ashes from the fields. Green began to push through the blackened soil. The rancher's wound healed slowly, leaving a deep scar that tugged when he moved. He didn't complain. Pain was an old friend, and this time it had meaning. They built a new shelter near the creek, smaller than the old cabin, but warm and dry. The women learned to ride his remaining horses, and he taught them how to mend fences, how to shoot if they needed to. The eldest woman taught him a few words in her language, simple ones like water, fire, home. At night, they would sit by the fire and listen to the wind. Sometimes the youngest would sing softly in her tongue, a melody both sorrowful and sweet. The rancher didn't understand the words, but he felt their weight. It was the sound of survival. One day, a messenger from town rode up the trail. He brought word that the army had moved south, chasing new conflicts. The sheriff had vouched for the rancher, claiming the fight had been self-defense. There would be no charges, no soldiers coming back. The land, for the first time in a long while, was free of fear. When the messenger left, the rancher stood looking out over the hills. The sky was wide and blue, the grass growing again where the fire had scorched it. He turned to the eldest woman and said, "You could leave now if you wanted. Start fresh somewhere else." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "This is fresh," she said simply. He smiled faintly. "Then we'll call it home." In the months that followed, the ranch grew quiet again, but not lonely. There were new rhythms now, the sound of laughter by the creek, the crackle of fire at dusk, the steady hum of rebuilding. The land, like the people on it, carried its scars. But those scars had softened into something strong and enduring. The rancher often thought about that night. The fire, the gunshots, the faces of men who came to destroy and those who fought to protect. He knew the story would fade in time, just another forgotten piece of the frontier. But to him it would always mean something more. It was proof that even in the harshest places, mercy could still take root. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the hills, the youngest woman brought him a small gift. It was the Apache pendant he'd once carried into battle, polished clean and strung on a new cord. She placed it in his hand and said softly, "Now it protects you." He looked down at it. his throat tight. "I reckon it already did," he said. The wind carried the last light across the plains, setting the fields aglow. The ranch stood quiet but alive again, stronger for what it had endured. And as the night came on and the stars returned, the rancher sat by the fire surrounded by the only family left to him, not by blood, but by choice. The war had taken many things, but it had given him something back too. A reason to keep living, and the fragile, stubborn hope that kindness could still outlast the fire.